Welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Young Gyo-Ken. As U.S. President-elect Joe Biden forges ahead with transition plans, he first came up with a list of the individuals he plans to nominate for top diplomatic and national security posts in his administration, and held an event to formally introduce them. Meanwhile, amid the moves to build up military capability across the Indo-Pacific region, U.S. Air Force has for the first time published footage of an F-35 stealth fighter simulating the dropping of a B-6112 tactical nuclear bomb. Today we'll discuss these and more. Joining us is Bruce Bennett, an international defense researcher at the RAND Corporation. Dr. Bennett is an expert in Northeast Asian military issues and has worked with the Office of the Secretary of Defense, the U.S. Pacific Command and Central Command, as well as the South Korean and Japanese militaries. Ken Gause also joins us today. Mr. Gause is the director of CNA's Adversary Analytics Program. He has spent the last 20 years examining leadership dynamics of authoritarian regimes. His latest book is North Korean House of Cards, Leadership Dynamics under Kim Jong-un. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Before we discuss Biden's picks for diplomatic and security posts, let's start with the U.S. military releasing first ever video of F-35 dropping new tactical nuclear bomb. What is the significance of this release of this footage? Dr. Bennett, first.
This is a case where this bomb is not just a tactical nuclear weapon. It's designed to penetrate the ground and therefore could be used for strategic purposes with a much increased performance. So this is indicated, the U.S. strategy relative to North Korea is that we will not allow the regime to survive if it uses a nuclear weapon. And this bomb would be the ideal means to take care of the underground facilities where Kim Jong-un would potentially be hiding, and to do so without causing all the fallout that many larger nuclear weapons would cause.
This B-6112 is also known as a bunker buster bomb that can take out North Korea's nuclear arsenal. Could the recent footage be interpreted as a warning to North Korea, Mr. Gause?
Well, yeah, I think that as we're leading into this new administration, the United States wants to make it very clear to North Korea that that if North Korea were to try something, especially along the lines of very damaging, military attack or something like that, that the United States has the means both to go after their nuclear program and their command and control networks inside North Korea, all of which are underground. And as Dr. Bennett said, this weapon is uniquely capable at going after those two sets of targets.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Bennett, you already mentioned about the North Korean regime, but will North Korea seriously take this as a warning?
Oh, I think they will. Now, they're going to look for ways to counter that kind of approach. But they've spent considerable effort in trying to create very deep underground facilities. And this weapon potentially undermines that. Now, the U.S. is unlikely to ever use it for a first strike. But this is telling North Korea, if you use even a single nuclear weapon, your regime is potentially at risk. That has been the U.S. Doctrine to this date, that the regime would not survive the use of nuclear weapons. And the U.S. doesn't want North Korea to be thinking seriously about that possibility.
Mm-hmm. And my additional question is, the F-35 is the only Western fifth-generation fighter capable of carrying nuclear weapons. And South Korea has recently deployed some F-35 fighter jets as well. Does this mean the South Korean military will be able to equip with the capability shown in the footage? Dr. Bennett?
So the F-35 is a fifth-generation fighter, but not all F-35s have the nuclear capability. In fact, only a very small number, because it is extraordinarily expensive to put that capability on a fighter aircraft. So this is a U.S. fighter aircraft that it will be using, but the ones we're selling to our allies and most of the ones the United States is buying for itself are not capable of delivering nuclear weapons.
Mr. Gause, earlier, a U.S. Navy Aegis-equipped destroyer successfully intercepted a simulated ICBM. Do you think this was closely watched by North Korea as well?
North Korea is signaling to the United States, which they did at their October parade, and the United States is signaling back as we're kind of laying the groundwork toward the movement of a new administration. I mean, the North Koreans already have an understanding of U.S. capabilities. They probably have an inflated view of some of our capabilities, but it's something that we kind of normally go through in terms of signaling back and forth military capabilities that we have in order to make sure that the other side understands, one, that we're keeping an eye on them, and two, that we have capabilities to take care of a range of contingencies.
Dr. Bennett, was this also the warning to North Korean regime?
North Korea is looking at bigger ICBMs. They're looking at potentially multiple independent reentry vehicles. They want to pose a very serious threat to the United States, hoping to undermine the U.S.-South Korea alliance. And we have to, therefore, just as Ken said, we have to be prepared to play the game as well and to convince them that this is not in their interest to threaten South Korea and threaten the United States. And that's a part of what's going on.
Factoring these circumstances in, we'll now move on to Biden's new diplomatic and national security team. Biden has announced some of his top cabinet picks, naming his longtime close advisor and former Deputy Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, as his choice to be the new Secretary of State. What kind of an approach will Blinken take towards North Korea?
Well, again, it's ultimately what is the course that President Biden will want to take. Secretary of State Blinken, if in fact he becomes the Secretary of State, I mean, we see kind of a traditional return to traditional U.S. foreign policy, strengthening of alliances, pressure on North Korea to try to work them towards some sort of a plan or road toward denuclearization. The question is whether we're willing to think enough out of the box in order to get North Korea engaged in such a movement toward denuclearization. We'll have to see. And so it really kind of comes down to what this administration and what President Biden will want to do is willing to put on the table to see if they can engage with North Korea. And then we'll have to see whether North Koreans even want to be engaged at this point in time. Right now, they have pretty much shut themselves down and out from the outside world because of the COVID virus and stuff. And we'll have to see how that plays out. And besides, it will take the Biden administration quite some time before they have everyone in place and then have a policy on North Korea kind of articulated before we see that. So we're kind of purely guessing at this point, but I would suspect it would look something along the lines of the Obama administration, maybe a little bit more flexible, but still want to see North Korea move down the road of denuclearization.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Bennett, do you agree with this view?
Yes, I think so. I mean, but I think the thing I would add is things are different than during the Obama administration. The threat North Korea is posing is now more serious and more short-term for the United States. Within 3 to 5 years, North Korea may have enough ICBMs to potentially threaten U.S. territory. So now coming in as Secretary of State, Mr. Blinken is going to face a different case, and he's going to have more pressure to make progress. I don't think that the Biden administration is going to slip back into strategic patience. They realize that that's not going to get them where they want to go, but neither are they going to compromise with North Korea and give North Korea whatever it wants. Because we've learned with the Trump administration, North Korea is prepared to take as much as they can get and offer as little as they have to.
How significantly do you see the roles of Jake Sullivan as the National Security Advisor and of Linda Thomas-Greenfield as the United Nations Ambassador in addressing the North Korean issues?
It will come down to the negotiating process, and whether we can get into a negotiating process with Kim. Right now, ever since Hanoi, North Korea really hasn't had an interest in negotiating. They don't think that the United States is willing to put significant sanctions relief and security guarantees on the table. And so therefore, I suspect that North Korea will kind of play hard to get. So it really will come down to the United States kind of figuring out how much pressure and how many carrots we want to offer to North Korea in order to get them where we want to go. Once we get them to the negotiating table, hopefully we have worked out in advance, what that negotiation will look like, as opposed to just showing up and kind of winging it, which is what we saw in Hanoi and Singapore. I think you can only get a limited amount there. But one thing that I did agree with what the Trump administration did is I believe it probably will have to be a top-down process. I don't think the North Koreans are going to go from bottom up. But that doesn't mean that we don't have the preparation from the bottom up, which many of these individuals around President Biden will be involved in. But probably President Biden would have to come out first and make some sort of statement about wanting to get into a process. So we'll see what happens.
Dr. Bennett, do you think that Biden administration should explore the top-down approach?
Well, I think it should be explored, but just as Dr. Gause has said, it is critical that the people supporting the president have some form of negotiation pretty well organized, because when you get together, Kim Jong-un is going to avoid commitments and going to want compromise on our part. And so any of the details have got to be worked out beforehand. This is not something that the president ought to be winging.
Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, Secretary Mike Pompeo publicly expressed his concern about the next administration, saying that they lived in a bit of a fantasy world. Dr. Bennett, what do you think he meant by this?
Well, look, it's a little surprising that Mr. Pompeo, with as knowledgeable as he is, would say something like that. It sounds largely political. I think this is a case where he's looking back at the strategic patience kind of attitude and saying you can't continue to do that. I think Biden and his people full well know that strategic patience isn't going to work with North Korea, that it's now time to really do something. And so I don't think this is back to the past. I think we are going to see the Biden administration really forced to go to the future and try and focus on what we need to change with North Korea. But as Dr. Gause said, there is no guarantee that North Korea is going to be prepared to negotiate. They're giving both the U.S. and South Korea the cold shoulder right now.
Mr. Gause, how can the Biden administration address this kind of concerns from their critics?
Well, I think that, I think that the Biden administration needs to focus on its own policy. It doesn't really need to worry about statements made by an administration that is on its way out. Obviously, I would agree with Dr. Bennett that this is political. They need to focus on the policy going forward and thinking about what they can do to negotiate more effectively with North Korea and what will be needed in order to actually get them into that process.
And China's top diplomat Wang Yi visited South Korea and Japan, and this move was widely seen as China reaching out to the longtime U.S. allies at a time when the U.S. is preparing for the leadership transition. Wang Yi, during his visit to Seoul, even said that the U.S. is not the only nation in the world. Mr. Gause, is China pressing South Korea and Japan when Biden is stressing the U.S. alliances in the region?
Well, I think that China knows that under a Biden administration that will move back toward alliance maintenance, which is really kind of suffered under the Trump administration. China is also rising in terms of its influence and power in the region. And I think that they want to make sure that the U.S. allies, the United States, South Korea and Japan, understand that China has equities in the region, and they want to make sure that they have their stake claimed on the relationships with these two countries, and hopefully, from their point of view, that these two countries don't get too close to the United States, and understand there's a balancing that they need to do going forward. And that's why I think that when we think about North as a adversary in the region, we also should look at it within the context of the larger China rise. And North Korea plays a role in that. And potentially, if the United States is able to find a way to engage with North Korea, that it will be to our benefit in terms of how we also deal with China.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Bennett, what was your takeaway from Wang Yi's visit?
Well, China has changed its strategy. There was a long period of peaceful rise of China. China's no longer in that period. Look at what they're doing to Australia. This is absolute manhandling, coercion. It is the worst kind of example of what a global leader ought to be doing. And it did the same kind of thing to South Korea over the THAAD deployment. I think that the Chinese foreign minister was trying to tell South Korea, this could happen to you too. And I think all of the U.S. allies need to start recognizing that, especially their economic dependence, like South Korea, on China, is a liability. Not something they can do anything about in the short term, but they face coercion. They face a Chinese attempt to dominate. And he certainly reminded them of that this week. I think we now need to be doing some more strategizing about how to balance China's leverage on our allies.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Gause, do you agree that China is taking a rather coercive attitude towards Korea or Japan or across the region?
Yes, I think China is, as their rise continues, I agree with Dr. Bennett that they're taking a much more aggressive stance in the region to lay down their stakes, to enforce their equities in the region. And it is something that we're going to have to deal with. My concern is that we get too bore-sighted on North Korea as a zero-sum game on the Korean Peninsula. And if we play our cards right, we can be in a much more advantageous position vis-a-vis China, the way that we deal with North Korea.
And this is my last question today. There was a report from South Korea that the North Korean regime has recently ordered its overseas missions not to antagonize the United States amid an ongoing transition in Washington following the presidential election win by Joe Biden. Mr. Gause, what do you think Kim Jong-un is thinking right now?
I think that the North Koreans are watching the American political situation play itself out. It's still very kind of opaque to them in terms of Trump kind of pushing back on the transition of power. He doesn't want to do anything to undermine Trump because Trump is a very unknown factor to the North Koreans and how he might react if it were to go into their traditional kind of provocative behavior too early. President Trump could react in a way that they don't expect. So I think that they're probably trying to make sure that they see clearly what the situation is going to be going forward and the transfer of power before they take their next move. And then they'll probably be kind of calculating about, what does the Biden administration say? Is the Biden administration going to engage with them or not? And then they will kind of leverage off of that in terms of their next moves.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Bennett, what was your thought when you heard the news?
Kim Jong-un likes to be in the limelight. Look, if you're supposed to be the god of North Korea, you should always be in the news. That's demonstration of your empowerment, of your strength. And the attention being paid to North Korea in the transition I'm sure he's very happy about that. That is fulfilling his desire to appear to be powerful. That means he's not under as much pressure to do a provocation to get attention. And so I think he's prepared to ease off a little bit, hoping that this highlighting of North Korea will continue. I think it's fairly likely that it will. The United States is concerned about developments, and certainly the October 10th parade raised many concerns on the U.S. side. So I think he's situated himself to have to put less pressure on directly and be able to do some more subtle kinds of things, which will be interesting to see what he tries.
Mm-hmm. And indeed, there seems to be a lot of speculations within the North Korean regime as to what kind of an approach the U.S. under the Biden administration may take towards Pyongyang. We'll need more time to find out how the future U.S.-North Korea relationship will unfold. Dr. Bennett and Mr. Gause, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to be with you.
And that does it for this week's Washington Talk from Voice of America. Please join us again next week for more analysis.